Picture this. It's somewhere around the year 1540. A ship of Norwegian sailors gets blown completely off course by a massive storm. They find themselves on the icy, desolate coast of Greenland. As they're looking for shelter, they spot something face down in the snow. And what they found that day is what kicks off one of history's most fascinating and chilling mysteries.
So what they'd found was a body. At first, they figured he must be one of the local Inuit, based on his sealskin clothes. But when they turned him over, they were just stunned. This man had red hair, pale skin. He was a Norseman, a Viking, just like them. But he was dead, completely alone at the edge of the world, with nothing but a worn-out knife lying next to him.
The sailors, well, they just took his knife and left. But you can imagine they were haunted by this. Who was this guy? And more importantly, where were the thousands of other Norse settlers who were supposed to be living there? How could an entire European colony, one that had been there for centuries, just vanish off the face of the earth?
To really wrap our heads around what was lost, we've got to go back, way back. We need to see how this incredible, improbable society was even born, and how they managed to carve out a little piece of medieval Europe on the absolute fringes of the known world.
Okay, so the story really starts with this amazing westward push by the Vikings. By 874, they'd settled Iceland. But, within just a couple of generations, all the good land was taken. And that's where this fiery, exiled guy named Eric the Red comes in. He hears rumors of another land even farther west, and in 982 he actually finds it. 3 years later, he comes back with one heck of a sales pitch and convinces hundreds of people to follow him into the great unknown to start a new life.
And this right here is where you see Eric's real genius. It wasn't just exploring, it was marketing. He knew it was a tough sell, right? Trying to get people to move to a frozen island. So what does he do? He gives this land of ice and rock a brilliant and, let's be honest, slightly misleading name: Greenland. He bet that the promise of something green would be enough to lure people in. And you know what? It totally worked.
And for centuries, they didn't just get by, they absolutely thrived. At its peak, we're talking about a colony with over 5,000 people spread across hundreds of farms. Now, this wasn't some rugged, muddy outpost. No. This was a proper European society. They even built a massive stone cathedral, importing stained glass and a huge bronze bell all the way from Norway.
So you're probably asking, how on earth did they afford all this stuff? Well, the secret was walrus ivory. To medieval Europe, those tusks were like Arctic gold. A single boatload of this white gold, which the Greenlanders hunted, was worth the same as nearly 800 cows. They had a complete monopoly on this incredible luxury good, and that was the engine that powered their entire civilization.
So, for 400 years, they were doing great. But then, the world around them started to change, and not in a good way. The very climate that had made their settlement possible was about to turn on them. Big time.
We call it the Little Ice Age. Starting in the late 1200s, the entire globe started to cool down. But for Greenland, the effects were absolutely catastrophic. Summer temperatures plunged, the growing season for their hay and crops got shorter and shorter, and massive fields of sea ice started to choke the fjords, cutting them off from the outside world.
And this really gets to the heart of their struggle. Archaeologists have actually found their clothes perfectly preserved in the ice, and what they reveal is this stubborn cultural pride. Even as the world was literally freezing around them, they kept on wearing European-style wool hoods and capes, trying to keep up with the latest fashions from a world away. They never adopted the much warmer, much more practical sealskin parkas that their Inuit neighbors wore. Okay, but to be fair, they weren't completely inflexible. New scientific evidence from their skeletons shows a huge shift in what they ate. As their farms failed and their livestock died, they were forced to turn to the sea. In the final years of the colony, up to 80% of their entire diet came from marine animals, mostly seals. They were adapting to survive, but it just wasn't enough. See, the thing is, the freezing climate? That was only half the problem. Their other huge challenge was that their vital connection to Europe, the lifeline that brought them iron, grain, and news from home, was about to be completely and totally severed. A series of devastating blows back in Europe basically sealed their fate. First up, the Black Death. It tore through Norway in 1349, killing so many people that it just crippled their shipping industry. After that, the supply ships to Greenland slowed to a mere trickle. And then came the final blow. Pirates attacked and burned Bergen, the main port for all Greenland voyages, right to the ground. Their lifeline was gone. They were utterly alone.
This quote from an archaeology report just perfectly captures how desperate things got. With no ships, there was no new iron. They had to reuse every single scrap they had. Can you just imagine sharpening and resharpening a knife until it's nothing but a tiny, worn-down stub, but you can't throw it away because it's just too precious? That was their reality. So let's just recap here. We've got a people who are freezing, they're starving, and they are completely cut off from the rest of the world. Which brings us to the final, haunting question. What actually happened to them? Did they all die there, or did they make one last desperate move?
It all really boils down to two big theories. Theory A is that they simply died out, a slow, grim end from starvation, disease, and cold. But Theory B, well, that one's a lot more interesting. It suggests that they didn't just die. They did what Vikings do best. They got in their boats and sailed away.
Now, the evidence for them dying out is pretty grim, and it's compelling. Skeletons from the final years show clear signs of severe malnutrition and stunted growth. Archaeologists have found the bones of their prized hunting dogs with knife marks all over them, a clear sign of absolute desperation. And maybe most chillingly, the discovery of certain types of insects in their houses strongly suggests that there were unburied bodies left inside to decay.
But, and this is a big but, the story isn't quite that simple. There's other evidence that points to a more deliberate departure. Some of the last farms seem to have been abandoned neatly, as if people packed up their most valuable items and just left. Inuit oral traditions talk about the Norse leaving the country, and the most tantalizing clue of all, an Icelandic chronicle mentions a ship full of Norse settlers arriving from Vinland, what we now call North America, right around the time the Greenland colony was collapsing.
So what does this all mean? Did the Greenland Vikings just fade away into the ice, their story ending with that lone man found in the snow? Or did they, in one final heroic act of exploration, sail west one last time? Did they assimilate into the New World, becoming the very first European Americans, centuries before Columbus ever set sail? The fate of that one man in Inuit clothing remains the symbol of this whole mystery, leaving us to wonder if the end of their story in Greenland was actually the beginning of a brand new one, somewhere else entirely.